The sound of heels clicking against marble echoed through the 42nd floor of Sterling Industries as another woman walked away from CEO Jonathan Sterling's office, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Victoria Harrison paused her mopping to watch the woman storm past, muttering words she couldn't quite catch. This was the third woman this week who had left his office looking defeated, and Victoria was starting to notice a pattern that made her stomach turn. From her position in the hallway, Victoria had overheard enough conversations to know that Jonathan Sterling had a reputation for being cold and dismissive toward women in business. She'd seen him reject proposals, dismiss ideas, and turn down partnerships with a cruelty that seemed to go beyond professional judgment. The way he looked at women like they were nuisances rather than colleagues made Victoria's skin crawl every time she witnessed it. As she continued cleaning the pristine floors, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with the way Jonathan Sterling treated half the population. She'd worked as a night janitor at Sterling Industries for 6 months now, and in that time she'd never seen him show respect or kindness to a single woman who entered his office. The pattern was so consistent it felt intentional, and that realization made her hands tremble as she wrung out her mop. Jonathan Sterling emerged from his office, his tall frame filling the doorway as he adjusted his expensive suit jacket. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his piercing blue eyes scanned the hallway with the same cold efficiency he brought to everything else. Victoria kept her head down, focusing on her work, but she could feel his presence like a weight in the air. "Miss Patterson," he called to his assistant, who hurried over with a tablet in her hands. "Cancel my dinner meeting with Rebecca Williams. I have no interest in hearing another pitch from someone who clearly doesn't understand the market." Victoria's grip tightened on her mop handle. She'd seen Rebecca Williams' presentation materials in the trash earlier, innovative ideas for sustainable technology that seemed brilliant to Victoria's untrained eye. The dismissal seemed particularly harsh, and Victoria found herself wondering if Jonathan's rejection had more to do with Rebecca's gender than her ideas. The conversation continued, but Victoria tried to tune it out as she moved her cleaning cart closer to Jonathan's office. She'd learned to make herself invisible during these late-night cleaning sessions, understanding that powerful men like Jonathan Sterling didn't want to be reminded that people like her existed. But tonight something felt different. The air was charged with tension, and Victoria had the unsettling feeling that she was about to witness something that would change everything. As she reached for her cleaning supplies, Victoria's hand slipped, sending a bottle of glass cleaner crashing to the floor. The sound echoed through the quiet hallway like a gunshot, and Victoria's heart raced as she dropped to her knees to clean up the mess. She could feel Jonathan's eyes on her, and when she finally looked up, she found him staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling," Victoria said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Jonathan's gaze lingered on her face, and Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in his eyes that she'd never seen before, not the cold dismissal he reserved for other women, but something else entirely. Something that made her feel exposed and vulnerable in a way that terrified her. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Victoria Harrison," she replied, still kneeling on the floor as she gathered the broken glass. "I'm sorry for the noise. I'll be more careful." Jonathan continued to watch her, and Victoria could feel the weight of his attention like a physical presence. She'd always been good at reading people, a skill that had served her well in her unusual circumstances, but Jonathan Sterling was a mystery she couldn't solve. The way he looked at her was different from how he looked at other women, and that difference frightened her more than his usual coldness ever could. "How long have you been working here?" Jonathan asked, taking a step closer to where Victoria knelt. 6 months, Victoria answered, finally standing up with the broken glass carefully wrapped in paper towels. "I worked the night shift, cleaning the executive floors." Something flickered in Jonathan's eyes, and Victoria had the disturbing realization that he'd been aware of her presence all along. The thought made her stomach twist with anxiety. Had he been watching her? Had he noticed her the way she'd noticed his pattern of behavior toward women? "I see," Jonathan said, his tone neutral but his eyes intense. "And what do you think of your work here?" The question caught Victoria off guard. In 6 months of working at Sterling Industries, no executive had ever asked her opinion about anything. She was invisible labor, someone who cleaned up after the important people but was never expected to have thoughts or feelings of her own. "It's honest work," Victoria said carefully, unsure of what response he was looking for. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." Jonathan's lips curved into what might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Grateful," he repeated as if the word amused him. "That's refreshing." Victoria felt a chill of unease. There was something in his tone that suggested her gratitude pleased him in a way that made her uncomfortable. She'd grown up learning to read the subtle signs of power and control, and every instinct she possessed was telling her that Jonathan Sterling was a man who enjoyed having power over others. "I should get back to work," Victoria said, hoping to end the conversation before it went any further. "Of course," Jonathan agreed, but he made no move to leave. Instead, he continued to watch her as she returned to her cleaning, his presence a constant reminder that she was being observed and evaluated in ways she didn't understand. As Victoria worked, she could feel Jonathan's eyes following her movements. The feeling was unsettling, invasive, and deeply uncomfortable. She'd dealt with unwanted male attention before, but this felt different. More calculating. More dangerous. When she finally dared to glance up again, Jonathan was still watching her, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes that made Victoria's blood run cold, a look of possession, as if he'd already decided something about her that she had no say in. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Jonathan Sterling, the man who dismissed and rejected every woman who entered his professional sphere, was looking at her like she was something he wanted to acquire. And Victoria, despite all her intelligence and strength, felt trapped in a web she was only beginning to understand. As the night wore on, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a turn toward something dark and uncertain. The way Jonathan had looked at her, the questions he'd asked, the obvious interest he'd shown, it all added up to a situation that filled her with dread. She finished her work in silence, hyper-aware of every sound and movement. When she finally gathered her supplies to leave, Victoria found herself hoping she'd never have to see Jonathan Sterling again. But deep down, she knew that hope was futile. Something had changed tonight, and there was no going back to the safety of invisibility she'd enjoyed before. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft chime, but Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving behind more than just another night of work. She was leaving behind her anonymity, her safety, and perhaps her freedom to choose her own path. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, Victoria closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heart. But the image of Jonathan Sterling's intense gaze followed her into the night, a reminder that some encounters change everything, whether you want them to or not. 3 days had passed since Victoria's unsettling encounter with Jonathan Sterling, and she'd hoped that the strange moment in the hallway had been nothing more than a brief curiosity on his part. But as she pushed her cleaning cart through the executive floor that Thursday night, Victoria realized her hope had been misplaced. Jonathan was still in his office, the lights still on, even though it was well past 10 o'clock. Victoria had been working at Sterling Industries long enough to know the patterns of the executives. Most left by 7, some stayed until 8, but Jonathan Sterling was usually gone by 9 at the latest. His late presence tonight felt deliberate, and Victoria's stomach knotted with anxiety as she tried to focus on her cleaning routine. She started at the far end of the hallway, hoping to work her way toward Jonathan's office slowly enough that he might leave before she had to pass by his door. But as she cleaned each office methodically, Victoria became increasingly aware that the light in Jonathan's office remained on, and she could hear the soft sound of typing from within. When she finally reached the area near his office, Victoria tried to move quietly, hoping to avoid another uncomfortable encounter. But as she began mopping the floor outside his door, Jonathan's voice cut through the silence. "Victoria." She froze, her hands gripping the mop handle tightly. Slowly, she turned toward the voice and found Jonathan standing in his doorway, his tie loosened and the top button of his shirt undone. He looked tired, but his eyes were as sharp and focused as ever. "Yes, Mr. Sterling?" Victoria replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear that was building in her chest. "Come in for a moment," Jonathan said, stepping back into his office. "I'd like to speak with you." Victoria's heart began to race. Every instinct told her to politely decline, to make an excuse about her work schedule and walk away. But she knew that refusing a direct request from the CEO could cost her the job she desperately needed. With reluctance, she parked her cleaning cart and stepped into Jonathan's office. The office was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city lights below. Jonathan's desk was massive, made of dark wood that probably cost more than Victoria made in a year. The entire space was designed to intimidate, and Victoria felt small and out of place standing in the middle of it. "Please sit," Jonathan said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs in front of his desk. Victoria remained standing. "I'm sorry, but I'm still working and I don't want to get your furniture dirty." Jonathan studied her for a moment, and Victoria could see something like approval in his eyes. "You're very conscientious," he said. "I admire that quality." "Thank you," Victoria replied carefully, unsure of where this conversation was heading. Jonathan moved around his desk and leaned against it, bringing himself closer to where Victoria stood. The proximity made her uncomfortable, but she forced herself to remain calm and professional. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other night," Jonathan said, his voice low and measured. "You mentioned that you were grateful for the opportunity to work here." "Yes, sir," Victoria confirmed, wondering where this was leading. "Most people take their jobs for granted," Jonathan continued, his eyes never leaving her face. "They expect things to be handed to them, they make demands, they feel entitled to more than they've earned. But you're different, aren't you?" Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in Jonathan's tone that made her deeply uncomfortable, as if he was testing her in some way. "I believe in working hard for what I receive," she said carefully. "Exactly," Jonathan said, and Victoria could see satisfaction in his expression. "That's what I thought about you. That's why I wanted to talk to you tonight." Victoria's mouth went dry. "I'm not sure I understand." Jonathan pushed away from his desk and began walking slowly around her, like a predator circling prey. Victoria forced herself to remain still, even though every nerve in her body was screaming at her to run. "You see, Victoria," Jonathan said, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone, "I've been watching you work. You're thorough, you're quiet, you don't complain or ask for special treatment. You understand your place here and you're grateful for it. That's very rare." The way he emphasized the word place made Victoria's skin crawl. She was beginning to understand what this conversation was really about, and the realization filled her with dread. "I do my job to the best of my ability," Victoria said, trying to keep her voice steady. "And you do it very well," Jonathan agreed, completing his circle around her and coming to stand directly in front of her again. "Which is why I have a proposition for you." Victoria's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "A proposition?" "I find myself in need of company," Jonathan said, his eyes locked on hers. "Social events, business dinners, various functions where having an attractive woman by my side would be beneficial. You're beautiful, you're intelligent, and most importantly, you understand gratitude." Victoria stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. "Mr. Sterling, Before you respond," Jonathan interrupted, "let me be clear about what I'm offering. This would be a significant improvement in your circumstances. Better pay, better hours, a chance to be part of a world you've only seen from the outside. All I ask in return is your company and your discretion." Victoria felt sick. She understood now why Jonathan had been so cold and dismissive to other women. He saw them as either beneath him or as threats to his control. But her, he saw as someone he could manipulate and use, someone who would be grateful for his attention because of her lower status. "I appreciate the offer," Victoria said carefully, "but I think there might be some misunderstanding. I'm just here to do my job." Jonathan's expression didn't change, but Victoria could see something calculating in his eyes. "Are you refusing my offer?" The question hung in the air between them, and Victoria realized she was at a crossroads. She could see the trap he was setting for her, the way he was using her economic vulnerability against her. But she also knew that refusing him outright could have serious consequences for her employment. "I'm honored that you would think of me," Victoria said, choosing her words carefully, "but I'm not sure I'm the right person for what you're looking for." "I think you're exactly the right person," Jonathan said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "And I think you're being unnecessarily modest." Victoria felt the walls closing in around her. She'd worked hard to maintain her independence and her dignity, but Jonathan Sterling was making it clear that he saw both as things he could purchase or take away at will. "I need to think about it," Victoria said, hoping to buy herself some time. "Of course," Jonathan agreed, but his tone suggested that he viewed her request as a formality rather than a genuine need for consideration. "Take all the time you need. But remember, opportunities like this don't come along often for people in your position." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to speak without revealing the fear and anger she was feeling. "You can go back to your work now," Jonathan said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "But I'll be waiting for your answer." Victoria left his office on unsteady legs, her mind racing as she tried to process what had just happened. She'd known from the beginning that Jonathan Sterling was a dangerous man, but she'd never imagined he would turn his attention to her so directly and so ruthlessly. As she returned to her cleaning, Victoria tried to think of a way out of the situation. She needed this job, but she couldn't accept Jonathan's proposition without losing part of herself in the process. The way he'd looked at her, the way he'd spoken about her place and her gratitude, made it clear that he saw her as something he could own rather than someone he could respect. The rest of the night passed in a blur of anxiety and fear. Victoria completed her work mechanically, her mind consumed with thoughts of what would happen if she refused Jonathan's offer. Would he fire her? Would he make her life at Sterling Industries so difficult that she'd have to quit? Or would he simply wait, using his position and power to slowly wear down her resistance until she had no choice but to accept? As Victoria finally left the building in the early hours of the morning, she realized that her life had just become infinitely more complicated. Jonathan Sterling had made it clear that he wanted something from her, and men like him were not accustomed to being told no. The question now was whether Victoria would be able to maintain her dignity and independence, or whether she would be forced to sacrifice them for the sake of survival. The city streets were quiet as Victoria walked to her car, but she felt as though she were being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound made her jump. Jonathan Sterling's words echoed in her mind, and she knew that no matter what she decided, her life would never be the same. As she drove home through the empty streets, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled into something dark and dangerous. The way Jonathan had looked at her, the way he'd spoken about her, made it clear that he saw her as prey rather than a person. And Victoria, despite all her strength and intelligence, wasn't sure she was equipped to handle the kind of predator Jonathan Sterling had revealed himself to be. Victoria spent the next week in a state of constant anxiety, jumping at every sound and dreading her nightly shifts at Sterling Industries. She'd managed to avoid Jonathan for several days, carefully timing her cleaning schedule to avoid his office when he was present. But she knew the reprieve was temporary. Men like Jonathan Sterling didn't make offers and then forget about them. On Tuesday night, Victoria's worst fears were realized when she arrived at work to find a message from Jonathan's assistant waiting for her. She was to report to his office immediately upon arrival. Victoria's hands shook as she read the note, and she had to force herself to breathe deeply before making her way to the executive floor. Jonathan was waiting for her, seated behind his massive desk with his hands folded in front of him. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man who had never been denied anything he wanted. Victoria stood in the doorway, reluctant to enter his domain again. "Come in, Victoria," Jonathan said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Close the door behind you." Victoria hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside and closed the door. The soft click seemed to echo in the silence, and she felt trapped, like an animal in a cage. "Have you thought about my offer?" Jonathan asked, getting straight to the point. Victoria had thought about little else, but she'd also come to a decision. "Mr. Sterling, I'm flattered by your interest, but I don't think I'm the right person for what you're looking for." Jonathan's expression didn't change, but Victoria could see something cold and calculating in his eyes. "I see. And why is that?" "I'm here to do my job," Victoria said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I clean offices, I empty trash, I maintain the building. That's what I was hired to do, and that's what I want to continue doing." "But what if I told you that I could offer you something better?" Jonathan asked, leaning back in his chair. "What if I told you that I could change your life completely?" Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. "I don't understand." Jonathan stood up and walked around his desk, coming to stand directly in front of her. "Let me be more specific about what I'm offering. I want you to accompany me to a charity gala this Saturday night. It's a simple evening, just a few hours of your time. In exchange, I'll pay you $5,000. Victoria's eyes widened. $5,000 was more than she made in 3 months of cleaning offices. The amount was staggering, and she could see from Jonathan's expression that he knew exactly how tempting it was. $5,000, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "For one evening," Jonathan confirmed. "All you have to do is look beautiful, smile, and let people assume you're with me. No other expectations, no other obligations. Just one night." Victoria's mind raced. The money would solve so many of her problems, would give her the security she'd been struggling to achieve. But she also knew that accepting Jonathan's offer would be crossing a line she might never be able to uncross. "I don't have anything appropriate to wear to a charity gala," Victoria said, surprised by her own words. She hadn't meant to negotiate, she'd meant to refuse. "That's not a problem," Jonathan said, and Victoria could see satisfaction in his eyes. "I'll have something sent to your apartment. Dress, shoes, jewelry, everything you need." Victoria stared at him, trying to process what was happening. "You know where I live?" "I know a lot of things about you, Victoria," Jonathan said, his voice taking on an almost intimate tone. "I know you work 2 jobs, I know you send money to your mother every month, I know you're struggling to make ends meet. This one evening could change all of that. The realization that Jonathan had been investigating her life made Victoria feel sick. But she also couldn't deny the truth of what he was saying. The money would make an enormous difference in her circumstances, and all she had to do was spend one evening in his company. What exactly would I be expected to do? Victoria asked, hating herself for even considering his offer. Nothing complicated, Jonathan assured her. You'd arrive with me, we'd mingle with other guests, perhaps dance a few times, and then I'd take you home. You'd be my companion for the evening, nothing more. Victoria wanted to believe him, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his offer than he was admitting. After Saturday night. After Saturday night, you go back to your regular life, Jonathan said. Unless, of course, you find that you enjoyed the experience and want to explore other opportunities. The way he said opportunities made Victoria's skin crawl, but the money was too tempting to ignore. $5,000 would give her breathing room, would allow her to stop worrying about rent and groceries and all the other financial pressures that kept her awake at night. I need to think about it, Victoria said, even though part of her mind had already made the decision. Of course, Jonathan agreed. But I'll need an answer by tomorrow night. The gala is this Saturday, and I'll need time to make the necessary arrangements. Victoria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She could feel Jonathan's eyes on her, studying her reaction, calculating her weaknesses. There's one more thing, Jonathan said as Victoria turned to leave. If you accept my offer, you'll need to understand that discretion is absolutely essential. What happens between us stays between us. Do you understand? Victoria turned back to face him, and she could see something dark and possessive in his expression. I understand. Good, Jonathan said, his lips curving into what might have been a smile. I'll be waiting for your answer. Victoria left his office feeling like she'd just signed her soul away, even though she hadn't yet agreed to anything. The weight of the decision pressed down on her as she went through the motions of her cleaning routine, her mind consumed with thoughts of what accepting Jonathan's offer would mean. As the night wore on, Victoria found herself thinking about the money, about the problems it would solve, about the relief it would bring. But she also thought about the look in Jonathan's eyes, about the way he'd spoken about discretion and opportunities, about the feeling that she was being drawn into something she didn't fully understand. By the time Victoria left the building that morning, she'd made her decision. She would accept Jonathan's offer, but she would also be careful to maintain her boundaries and protect herself as much as possible. It was just one evening, she told herself. Just a few hours of her time in exchange for financial security. But as Victoria drove home through the quiet streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a mistake. Jonathan Sterling was not a man who did anything without expecting something in return, and Victoria feared that the price of his generosity might be higher than she was prepared to pay. The next evening, Victoria arrived at work with her answer. She found Jonathan waiting for her in his office, and she could see anticipation in his eyes as she entered. I'll do it, Victoria said without preamble. I'll go to the gala with you. Jonathan's smile was triumphant, and Victoria felt a chill of fear at the sight of it. I knew you would make the right decision, he said. You won't regret this, Victoria. I promise you that. But as Victoria left his office that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that she already did regret it. She'd accepted Jonathan's offer with gratitude, just as he'd expected her to, but she couldn't escape the sense that she'd just taken the first step down a path she might never be able to leave. The arrangements were made with frightening efficiency. By Thursday, a stunning black dress had been delivered to Victoria's apartment, along with shoes, jewelry, and even a small purse. Everything fit perfectly, and Victoria realized with growing unease that Jonathan had somehow obtained her exact measurements. As Saturday approached, Victoria's anxiety grew. She'd committed herself to spending an evening with a man she didn't trust, in a world she didn't understand, for reasons that had less to do with opportunity and more to do with desperation. But it was too late to back out now, and Victoria knew that Jonathan Sterling was not a man who accepted rejection gracefully. The die was cast, and Victoria could only hope that she would emerge from Saturday night with her dignity and her safety intact. But deep down, she suspected that one evening with Jonathan Sterling would change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine, and not all of those changes would be for the better. Saturday evening arrived with an unseasonable chill that made Victoria's hands shake as she applied her makeup. The black dress Jonathan had sent fit her perfectly, hugging her curves in all the right places while maintaining an air of elegance that made her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. The jewelry was real, she could tell by the weight of it, and the shoes were the kind she'd only seen in magazines. As Victoria looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The transformation was startling, and she understood now why Jonathan had been so confident in his offer. She looked like she belonged in his world, at least on the surface. The knock on her door came at exactly 7 o'clock, and Victoria's heart began to race. She'd been dreading this moment all week, but she'd also been curious about what the evening would bring. As she opened the door, she found Jonathan standing in the hallway, looking devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. "You look stunning," Jonathan said, his eyes traveling over her appearance with obvious appreciation. "Even better than I imagined." "Thank you," Victoria replied, accepting his compliment with the grace she'd learned growing up in a world very different from the one she currently inhabited. Jonathan offered her his arm, and Victoria took it, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. As they walked to the elevator, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror and was struck again by how different she looked. The woman in the reflection could have been anyone: a socialite, a model, a businessman's wife. Only Victoria knew the truth about who she really was. The ride to the gala was conducted in Jonathan's private car, a sleek black vehicle that probably cost more than most people's houses. Victoria sat beside him, acutely aware of his presence and the way he kept glancing at her with satisfaction, as if she were a prize he'd won. "Are you nervous?" Jonathan asked as they pulled up to the hotel where the gala was being held. "A little," Victoria admitted, deciding that honesty was the best policy. "Don't be," Jonathan said, his voice taking on an almost gentle tone. "You're going to be perfect. Just follow my lead and let me handle the conversations." Victoria nodded, though something about his instruction made her uncomfortable. She'd never been someone who needed to be handled or managed, but tonight she was playing a role, and she supposed that meant following someone else's script. The hotel was magnificent, with a red carpet leading to the entrance and photographers capturing the arrivals of various dignitaries and celebrities. Victoria felt a moment of panic as she realized she was about to be photographed with Jonathan, but before she could voice her concerns, he was helping her out of the car. "Smile," Jonathan murmured in her ear as the cameras began flashing. "Look like you're having the time of your life." Victoria smiled, drawing on acting skills she'd developed years ago, and was surprised to find that the cameras didn't bother her as much as she'd expected. She'd been photographed before in different circumstances, and the experience felt familiar despite the changed context. The ballroom was breathtaking, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables decorated with white roses and gold accents. The guests were exactly what Victoria had expected: wealthy, powerful, and perfectly groomed. She recognized several faces from magazine covers and news programs, and she felt a thrill of excitement despite her anxiety. "Let me introduce you to some people," Jonathan said, placing his hand on the small of her back and guiding her toward a group of well-dressed couples. The introductions were a blur of names and faces, but Victoria found herself settling into the role more easily than she'd anticipated. She smiled, made polite conversation, and let Jonathan lead the way just as he'd instructed. But as the evening progressed, she began to notice something interesting. Jonathan was different tonight than he'd been in his office. He was charming, attentive, and genuinely seemed to enjoy her company. When they danced, he held her gently and complimented her grace. When they talked, he listened to her opinions and even laughed at her jokes. For brief moments, Victoria almost forgot that this was a business arrangement. "You're a natural at this," Jonathan said as they swayed to the music during a slow dance. "I've been to dozens of these events, and I've never enjoyed one as much as I'm enjoying tonight." Victoria looked up at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Really?" "Really," Jonathan confirmed. "You're not like the other women I usually bring to these things. You're genuine, you're intelligent, and you're not trying to impress anyone. It's refreshing." The compliment made Victoria's heart flutter, and she found herself wondering if perhaps she'd misjudged Jonathan. Maybe he wasn't the cold, calculating man she'd thought he was. Maybe tonight was about more than just business. As the evening continued, Victoria found herself relaxing and actually enjoying the experience. The food was incredible, the entertainment was world-class, and the conversation was stimulating. She met artists and philanthropists, politicians and business leaders, and she discovered that she could hold her own in their discussions. "You're doing beautifully," Jonathan whispered in her ear during a brief break in the activities. "Everyone is charmed by you." Victoria felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She'd been nervous about fitting in, about saying the wrong thing or embarrassing herself, but Jonathan's reassurance made her feel more confident. "I'm actually having fun," Victoria admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "I'm glad," Jonathan said, his smile reaching his eyes in a way she'd never seen before. I was hoping you would. As the evening wound down, Victoria found herself reluctant to leave. She'd enjoyed the music, the dancing, and the conversation. But more than that, she'd enjoyed spending time with this version of Jonathan. He'd been attentive without being possessive, charming without being manipulative, and genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. "Thank you for tonight," Victoria said as Jonathan helped her into her coat. "It was wonderful." "The pleasure was all mine," Jonathan replied, and Victoria could see that he meant it. "I hope we can do this again sometime." The ride back to Victoria's apartment was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence rather than an awkward one. Victoria found herself thinking about the evening, about the way Jonathan had treated her, about the glimpses she'd gotten of the man beneath the cold exterior. When they arrived at her building, Jonathan walked her to her door, and Victoria felt a flutter of nerves. She wasn't sure what to expect, what he might ask of her, or how the evening was supposed to end. "Thank you again," Victoria said as she turned to face him at her door. "Tonight was incredible." "You were incredible," Jonathan corrected, his voice soft and sincere. "I meant what I said earlier. You're not like anyone I've ever met." Victoria felt her heart skip a beat. There was something in Jonathan's expression that made her think he might be about to kiss her, and she was surprised to realize that she wanted him to. But instead, Jonathan took her hand and lifted it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Sleep well, Victoria," he said. "I'll be in touch soon." As Victoria watched him walk away, she felt a confusion of emotions. The evening had been nothing like what she'd expected, and Jonathan had been nothing like the cold, calculating man she'd encountered in his office. She'd seen glimpses of someone warmer, more genuine, and undeniably attractive. Inside her apartment, Victoria carefully hung up the beautiful dress and placed the jewelry back in its box. As she removed her makeup, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and was struck by how different she felt. The evening had awakened something in her, a confidence and excitement she hadn't felt in years. But as she lay in bed that night, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting in over her head. Jonathan Sterling was a powerful, complex man, and she was just a janitor playing dress-up in his world. The magic of the evening couldn't change the reality of their circumstances, and Victoria knew that whatever was happening between them was built on a foundation of deception and inequality. Still, as she drifted off to sleep, Victoria couldn't help but smile at the memory of dancing in Jonathan's arms, of the way he'd looked at her like she was the only woman in the room, of the gentle kiss he'd pressed to her hand. For one night, she'd felt like a princess, and that feeling was intoxicating. The next morning brought Victoria back to reality with a harsh jolt. She had to work her weekend shift at her second job, and the contrast between the glamorous world she'd inhabited the night before and her actual life was jarring. But throughout the day she found herself thinking about Jonathan, about the way he'd treated her, about the possibility that there might be more to him than she'd originally thought. Monday night arrived with a sense of anticipation that Victoria couldn't shake. She wondered if Jonathan would be in his office, if he would want to talk about the gala, if he would make another offer. As she made her way through the executive floor, Victoria's heart raced with nervous energy. The light in Jonathan's office was on, and Victoria could see him sitting at his desk, working late as usual. But tonight something was different. When he looked up and saw her, his face broke into a genuine smile that made Victoria's heart skip a beat. "Victoria," he said, standing up and walking toward her. "I was hoping I'd see you tonight." "Hello, Mr. Sterling," Victoria replied, suddenly feeling shy in his presence. "Please," Jonathan said, his voice warm and inviting. "After Saturday night, I think you can call me Jonathan." Victoria felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Jonathan," she said, testing the name on her tongue. "I wanted to thank you again for Saturday night," Jonathan continued. "You were absolutely perfect and I received so many compliments about you. People were impressed by your grace, your intelligence, your beauty." Victoria felt a flutter of pride at his words. "Thank you. I had a wonderful time." "I'm glad," Jonathan said, his eyes searching her face. "Because I was hoping you might consider making this a more regular arrangement." Victoria's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" "I have several events coming up over the next few weeks," Jonathan explained. "Business dinners, charity functions, social gatherings. I would love to have you accompany me to all of them." Victoria stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. "All of them?" "The compensation would be generous," Jonathan assured her. "And I promise you would enjoy yourself." Saturday night was just the beginning. Victoria felt torn between excitement and caution. The money would be incredible, and she genuinely enjoyed the evening, but she was also afraid of getting too deep into something she didn't fully understand. I need to think about it, Victoria said, echoing her response from the week before. Of course, Jonathan agreed. But I hope you'll say yes. I meant what I said Saturday night. You're not like anyone I've ever met. I would very much like to spend more time with you. There was something in Jonathan's tone that made Victoria's heart race. He wasn't just talking about business arrangements anymore. There was something personal in his voice, something that suggested his interest in her went beyond what she could do for him at social events. I'll let you know, Victoria promised, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll be waiting, Jonathan said, his eyes locked on hers. As Victoria left his office that night, she felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice. One step forward and her life would change completely. One step back and she would return to the safety of her routine existence. But as she thought about the way Jonathan had looked at her, the way he'd made her feel, Victoria realized that she might already be falling. Victoria spent the next 3 days in a state of emotional turmoil. Jonathan's offer echoed in her mind during every quiet moment, and she found herself thinking about Saturday night with an intensity that surprised her. She'd felt something that evening, a connection, a spark, something that went beyond the business arrangement she'd agreed to. On Thursday night, Victoria arrived at work with her decision made. She would accept Jonathan's offer, but she would also be honest about her growing feelings. As she made her way to his office, her heart pounded with nervous anticipation. Jonathan was waiting for her, and Victoria could see hope and anxiety in his expression as she entered his office. Have you thought about my offer? He asked, his voice carefully controlled. I have, Victoria replied, taking a deep breath. And I'd like to accept it. Jonathan's face lit up with genuine joy. That's wonderful news. I promise you won't regret this decision. There's something else, Victoria said, gathering her courage. I need to be honest with you about something. Jonathan's expression grew serious. What is it? Saturday night was supposed to be just business, Victoria began, her voice trembling slightly. But something happened that I wasn't expecting. I found myself enjoying your company, not just as an escort or a companion, but as a person. I think I'm developing feelings for you, and I needed you to know that before we continue. Jonathan stared at her for a long moment, and Victoria felt her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd just made herself completely vulnerable, and she had no idea how he would respond. Victoria, Jonathan said finally, his voice soft and filled with emotion. I'm glad you told me that because I've been feeling the same way. Victoria's eyes widened in surprise. You have. Saturday night changed everything for me, Jonathan admitted, moving closer to her. I thought I was hiring a companion, but what I found was something infinitely more precious. You're beautiful, yes, but more than that, you're genuine and kind and intelligent. You made me remember what it feels like to actually enjoy someone's company. Victoria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. I was so afraid you would think I was overstepping boundaries. Never, Jonathan said firmly. If anything, I was afraid that you would think I was taking advantage of our arrangement. The truth is, Victoria, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since Saturday night. The way you smiled, the way you laughed, the way you felt in my arms when we danced, it's all I can think about. Victoria's heart soared at his words. So what does this mean for us? It means I'd like to take you on a real date, Jonathan said, his eyes never leaving hers. Not as part of a business arrangement, but because I want to spend time with you. I want to get to know you better, to understand what makes you who you are. Victoria felt a warmth spread through her chest. I'd like that very much. There's a restaurant I know, Jonathan continued, his voice gaining confidence. It's quiet, private, perfect for conversation. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? Yes, Victoria said without hesitation. I'd love to. Jonathan's smile was radiant. Then it's a date. As Victoria left his office that night, she felt like she was walking on air. Everything was changing so quickly, but for the first time in months, she felt hopeful about the future. Jonathan had feelings for her, real feelings, and that knowledge made her heart sing. The next evening, Victoria found herself getting ready for her date with an excitement she hadn't felt in years. She chose a simple but elegant dress from her own wardrobe, wanting to look beautiful while still being herself. As she applied her makeup, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and was struck by how happy she looked. Jonathan picked her up at 7, and Victoria was touched by the effort he'd put into the evening. He'd chosen a small, intimate restaurant where they could talk without interruption, and he'd made sure they had a private table away from prying eyes. You look beautiful, Jonathan said as they were seated, and Victoria could hear the sincerity in his voice. Thank you, Victoria replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. You look pretty handsome yourself. The conversation flowed easily between them, and Victoria was amazed by how different Jonathan was outside of his office environment. He was funny, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. He asked about her dreams, her fears, her hopes for the future, and he listened to her answers with complete attention. "I have to admit something," Jonathan said as they shared dessert. "I've been wondering about you for weeks. There's something about you that's different from anyone I've ever met. You have this quiet strength, this grace under pressure that I find incredibly attractive." Victoria felt her heart flutter. "I've been wondering about you too. You're not at all what I expected when I first met you." "What did you expect?" Jonathan asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Someone cold, distant, maybe a little cruel," Victoria admitted. "But you're not any of those things. You're kind and funny and surprisingly vulnerable." Jonathan's expression grew serious. "I want to be honest with you about something. I know I can come across as cold or demanding at work, but that's because I've had to build walls to protect myself. The business world can be brutal, and I learned early on that showing weakness could be dangerous." "But you don't feel like you need to protect yourself from me?" Victoria asked softly. "No," Jonathan said without hesitation. "With you I feel like I can be myself. That's a gift I didn't know I was missing." As the evening progressed, Victoria found herself falling deeper under Jonathan's spell. He was charming and attentive, but more than that, he seemed genuinely interested in her as a person. When he walked her to her door at the end of the night, Victoria felt a sense of completion she'd never experienced before. "I had a wonderful time tonight," Victoria said as they stood outside her apartment building. "So did I," Jonathan replied, his voice warm and sincere. "I'd like to do this again if you're willing." "I'd love that," Victoria said, meaning every word. Jonathan stepped closer, and Victoria felt her heart begin to race. "Victoria," he said softly, "I know this is complicated with our work situation and everything, but I want you to know that my feelings for you are real. This isn't about business or convenience or any kind of arrangement. This is about you and how you make me feel." Victoria felt tears of happiness prick at her eyes. "My feelings are real too," she whispered. Jonathan cupped her face gently in his hands. "May I kiss you?" Victoria nodded, and Jonathan leaned down to press his lips to hers. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, but as Victoria responded, it deepened into something more passionate. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "That was even better than I imagined," Jonathan said, his voice husky with emotion. "You imagined kissing me?" Victoria asked, a smile playing at her lips. "Every day since Saturday night," Jonathan admitted. "You've been driving me crazy, Victoria Harrison." Victoria laughed, feeling giddy with happiness. "Good," she said playfully. "I like the idea of driving you crazy." Jonathan grinned and kissed her again, this time with more confidence and passion. When they separated, Victoria felt like her world had been turned upside down in the best possible way. "I should let you get some rest," Jonathan said reluctantly. "But I'll call you tomorrow?" "I'll be waiting," Victoria promised. As Jonathan walked away, Victoria watched him go with a smile on her face and joy in her heart. She'd taken a leap of faith by accepting his offer, and it had led to something beautiful and unexpected. For the first time in years, Victoria felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Inside her apartment, Victoria replayed every moment of the evening in her mind. The conversation, the laughter, the way Jonathan had looked at her like she was the most important person in the world. But most of all, she remembered the kiss, the way it had felt to be held by him, to feel his lips against hers. As she got ready for bed, Victoria couldn't stop smiling. She'd found something special with Jonathan, something worth fighting for. And as she drifted off to sleep, she allowed herself to dream about what the future might hold for them. The next morning brought a text from Jonathan that made Victoria's heart skip. "Good morning, beautiful. I can't stop thinking about last night. Lunch today?" Victoria texted back immediately, "I'd love to. Can't wait to see you again." As she got ready for her day, Victoria felt a lightness in her step that had been missing for months. She was falling in love with Jonathan Sterling, and miracle of miracles, he seemed to be falling in love with her too. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Victoria felt ready to face them, because she wouldn't be facing them alone. Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria and Jonathan spent every free moment together. What had started as a business arrangement had blossomed into something neither of them had expected, a genuine, deep connection that grew stronger with each passing day. Jonathan showed Victoria a side of the city she'd never seen before. They went to art galleries and quiet bookshops, had picnics in hidden corners of Central Park, and spent hours talking in cozy cafes. Victoria discovered that beneath his powerful exterior, Jonathan was thoughtful, funny, and surprisingly vulnerable. "I've never done this before," Jonathan admitted one evening as they walked hand in hand through the city streets. "I've never had a relationship where I felt like I could be completely myself." Victoria squeezed his hand gently. "What do you mean?" "In my world, everything is calculated," Jonathan explained. "Business relationships, social connections, even the women I used to date, everything had an agenda. But with you, I don't have to be the CEO or the billionaire or any of those things. I can just be Jonathan." Victoria felt her heart swell with affection. "And I love Jonathan," she said softly. "Not Mr. Sterling, not the CEO, just you." Jonathan stopped walking and turned to face her, his eyes filled with emotion. "I love you too, Victoria. I didn't think I was capable of feeling this way, but you've changed everything for me." The words hung in the air between them, and Victoria felt tears of happiness prick at her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered, and Jonathan pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left them both breathless. Their relationship deepened as they learned more about each other. Jonathan told Victoria about his difficult childhood, about building his company from nothing, about the loneliness that had driven him to work obsessively. Victoria shared her own struggles, her dreams, her fears, though she was careful to keep certain details about her background vague. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a fairy tale," Victoria confided one evening as they sat on Jonathan's terrace, looking out over the city lights. "A few weeks ago, I was just a janitor, and now I'm here with you, feeling things I never thought I'd feel." Jonathan pulled her closer, his arm tightening around her waist. "You were never just a janitor, Victoria. You're extraordinary, and I saw that from the very beginning." "Is that why you approached me?" Victoria asked, curious about his motivations. Jonathan was quiet for a moment, and Victoria could see him choosing his words carefully. "I noticed you because you were different from everyone else. You didn't want anything from me, you weren't trying to impress me or use me. You were just yourself. And that was more attractive than anything I'd ever encountered." Victoria felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I never imagined someone like you would notice someone like me." "Someone like you?" Jonathan repeated, turning to face her. "Victoria, you're intelligent, beautiful, kind, and strong. You work hard, you care about others, and you have this incredible ability to see the best in people. Any man would be lucky to have you in his life." Victoria felt tears gathering in her eyes. "You really mean that?" "I mean every word," Jonathan said firmly. "I know our circumstances are unusual, but what we have is real. I've never felt this way about anyone before." As the days passed, Victoria found herself falling deeper in love with Jonathan. He was attentive and caring, remembering small details about her preferences and surprising her with thoughtful gestures. He brought her favorite flowers, took her to restaurants she mentioned wanting to try, and listened to her talk about her dreams with genuine interest. But Victoria also began to notice the challenges their relationship would face. At work, she still had to clean offices and empty trash cans, while Jonathan ran board meetings and made million-dollar decisions. The contrast between their public and private lives was stark, and Victoria worried about how long they could maintain the balance. "I've been thinking," Victoria said one evening as they lay in bed together, her head resting on Jonathan's chest. About how this works." "What do you mean?" Jonathan asked, his fingers stroking her hair gently. "At work, I'm still the janitor and you're still the CEO, Victoria explained. "We have to pretend we don't know each other, that we don't have feelings for each other. It's getting harder to maintain that facade." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, and Victoria could feel the tension in his body. "I know," he said finally. "I've been thinking about that too." "What do we do about it?" Victoria asked. "I don't know," Jonathan admitted. "I want to be able to acknowledge our relationship publicly, but I also know that it would create complications for both of us. People would have opinions, they'd make assumptions about you and about me." Victoria lifted her head to look at him. "What kind of assumptions?" Jonathan's expression grew dark. "They'd assume you were using me for my money, or that I was taking advantage of you because of our different positions. They wouldn't understand that what we have is real." Victoria felt a chill of fear. "And what if they're right? What if people can't accept us together?" "Then we'll prove them wrong," Jonathan said firmly, his hands cupping her face. "I don't care what anyone else thinks, Victoria. I only care about you and what we have together." Victoria felt reassured by his words, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship was built on a foundation that might not be as stable as it seemed. She was keeping secrets from Jonathan, and she knew that eventually the truth would have to come out. "There's something I need to tell you," Victoria began, then stopped herself. She wanted to tell him about her real background, about who she really was, but she was afraid of how he would react. "What is it?" Jonathan asked, his voice gentle and encouraging. Victoria looked into his eyes and saw nothing but love and acceptance. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm grateful for everything you've given me. Not just the money or the experiences, but the way you make me feel. You make me feel valuable, important, loved." Jonathan's expression softened. "You are all of those things, Victoria. And more." As they held each other in the darkness, Victoria felt a mixture of joy and anxiety. She was deeply in love with Jonathan, and she believed that he loved her too. But she also knew that their relationship was more complicated than either of them wanted to admit. The next morning, Victoria woke up to find Jonathan already dressed for work. He kissed her goodbye and promised to call her later, but Victoria could see the stress in his eyes. The pressure of maintaining their secret relationship was affecting both of them. At work that night, Victoria found it almost impossible to concentrate on her cleaning duties. Every time she passed Jonathan's office, she wanted to go in and kiss him, to talk to him, to be with him. But she forced herself to maintain the professional distance their situation required. Jonathan, for his part, seemed to be struggling with the same challenges. Victoria caught him watching her several times, and she could see the longing in his eyes. When their hands accidentally touched as she emptied his trash can, Victoria felt an electric shock of desire that left her breathless. "This is torture," Jonathan said softly as Victoria prepared to leave his office. "I know," Victoria whispered back. "But we have to be careful." "I don't want to be careful," Jonathan said, his voice filled with frustration. "I want to be with you, openly and honestly. I want the world to know that you're mine." Victoria felt her heart race at his possessive words. "Jonathan." "I know," he said, running his hands through his hair. "I know we have to be patient. But it's killing me, Victoria. Having you so close and not being able to touch you, to hold you, to kiss you." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. She wanted the same things he did, but she also knew that their situation was more complicated than he realized. When he learned the truth about her, everything might change. "We'll figure it out," Victoria said, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. "We'll find a way to make this work." Jonathan nodded, but Victoria could see the doubt in his eyes. They were both struggling with the same question. How long could they continue to live a double life before something had to give? As Victoria left the building that night, she felt the weight of their situation pressing down on her. She loved Jonathan more than she'd ever loved anyone, but she was also afraid that their relationship was built on a foundation of secrets and deception that might not be able to withstand the truth. But for now, she pushed those fears aside and focused on the joy of being loved by an incredible man. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Victoria was determined to fight for what they had together. Love like theirs was rare, and she wasn't going to let it slip away without a fight. 2 weeks into their secret relationship, Victoria noticed a change in Jonathan's behavior. He seemed distracted during their dates, checking his phone more frequently and asking subtle questions about her past that made her increasingly uncomfortable. "Tell me about your family," Jonathan said one evening as they shared dinner at a quiet restaurant. "You mentioned your mother, but you've never really talked about your background." Victoria felt her stomach tighten. She'd been dreading this conversation, knowing that eventually Jonathan would want to know more about her life. "There's not much to tell," she said carefully. "I grew up in a small town, my mother raised me alone. Pretty typical story." "What about your father?" Jonathan pressed gently. "He wasn't around much," Victoria replied, which was technically true, though it didn't tell the whole story. "My mother did the best she could on her own." Jonathan nodded, but Victoria could see something calculating in his eyes. "And you've always worked service jobs? Cleaning, that sort of thing?" Victoria's heart began to race. "Mostly yes. Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Jonathan said, but his tone suggested there was more to his interest than simple curiosity. "You seem very well educated for someone who's worked primarily in service positions." Victoria felt trapped. She'd been careful to speak naturally around Jonathan, but she'd obviously let her guard down enough that he'd noticed her education and background. "I read a lot," she said weakly. "I'm sure you do," Jonathan agreed, but Victoria could see doubt in his expression. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that Jonathan was studying her, looking for inconsistencies in her story. The realization made her feel sick with anxiety. Over the next few days, Victoria's fears were confirmed. Jonathan asked more questions about her past, her education, her family. Each inquiry felt like a probe, and Victoria found herself becoming more and more evasive in her responses. I feel like I don't really know you, Jonathan said one evening as they sat in his apartment. Every time I ask about your past, you change the subject or give me vague answers. Victoria's heart pounded. I don't like talking about myself, she said, which was partially true. But I'm not just anyone, Jonathan said, his voice taking on a harder edge. I'm the man who loves you, the man you claim to love. Don't I deserve to know who you really are? Victoria felt tears gathering in her eyes. You do know who I am, she said desperately. You know everything that matters. Do I? Jonathan asked, his eyes searching her face. Because sometimes I feel like you're hiding something from me. Victoria's worst fears were coming true. Jonathan was becoming suspicious, and she knew that it was only a matter of time before he discovered the truth about her identity. The question was whether she should tell him herself or wait for him to find out on his own. I'm not hiding anything important, Victoria said, hating herself for the lie. Jonathan stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. I hope that's true, Victoria. Because if there's one thing I can't tolerate, it's deception. The word deception hit Victoria like a physical blow. She was deceiving Jonathan and she knew it. But she also knew that telling him the truth might destroy everything they'd built together. That night, Victoria lay awake in Jonathan's arms, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with her conscience. She loved him desperately, but she was also living a lie. Every day that passed made the deception worse, and she knew that eventually the truth would come out. The next evening at work, Victoria's worst fears were confirmed. She was cleaning the conference room when she overheard a conversation between Jonathan and his assistant. The background check on Victoria Harrison is complete, the assistant was saying. There are some interesting findings. Victoria's blood ran cold. Jonathan had ordered a background check on her. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more of the conversation. What kind of findings? Jonathan asked, his voice tense. There are gaps in her employment history, the assistant replied. And some inconsistencies in her educational background. It appears she attended private schools, which doesn't match her current circumstances. Victoria felt like she was going to be sick. Jonathan was investigating her, and he was going to discover everything she'd been hiding. Keep digging, Jonathan said, his voice cold and professional. I want to know everything about Victoria Harrison. Victoria slipped away from the conference room, her heart pounding and her hands shaking. Jonathan didn't trust her, and he was actively investigating her background. The man she loved was treating her like a suspect, and that realization broke her heart. For the rest of the night, Victoria went through the motions of her work while her mind raced with thoughts of what Jonathan would discover. Her real name, her family background, her education, all of it would come out, and she would have to face the consequences of her deception. The next morning, Victoria woke up to find Jonathan already gone. He'd left her a note saying he had an early meeting, but Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that he was avoiding her. The investigation was clearly weighing on his mind, and she knew that their relationship was in jeopardy. That evening, Victoria arrived at work dreading what she might find. Jonathan's office light was on, and she could see him sitting at his desk, reviewing a thick file. Victoria's heart sank as she realized that the file was probably about her. As she cleaned the hallway outside his office, Victoria could feel Jonathan's eyes on her. When she finally gathered the courage to look up, she found him watching her with an expression she'd never seen before. There was hurt in his eyes and disappointment and something that looked like betrayal. Victoria, Jonathan called out, his voice carefully controlled. Could I speak with you for a moment? Victoria's legs felt weak as she walked into his office. The file was open on his desk, and she could see her photograph clipped to the inside cover. Her real photograph, not the one from her current identity. Sit down, Jonathan said, his voice cold and professional. Victoria sat in the chair across from his desk, her hands trembling in her lap. She knew that the moment of truth had arrived, and she was terrified of what would happen next. I think you know why I asked you here, Jonathan said, his eyes never leaving her face. The background check, Victoria said quietly. Yes, Jonathan confirmed. The background check that revealed some very interesting information about you. Victoria felt tears gathering in her eyes. I can explain. Can you? Jonathan asked, his voice harsh. Can you explain why you've been lying to me about who you are? Can you explain why the woman I fell in love with doesn't actually exist? Victoria's heart broke at the pain in his voice. I am who you fell in love with, she said desperately. The name might be different, but I'm the same person. Are you? Jonathan asked, leaning back in his chair. Because according to this file, Victoria Harrison is a fabrication. The real question is, Who are you really? Victoria closed her eyes, knowing that she had no choice but to tell him the truth. The deception was over and she would have to face the consequences of her lies. My real name is Victoria Rodriguez, she said quietly. And I'm not who you think I am. Jonathan's expression didn't change, but Victoria could see the muscles in his jaw tighten. Go on. I'm the daughter of Eduardo Rodriguez, Victoria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Of Rodriguez Industries. Jonathan's eyes widened in shock. Rodriguez Industries was one of the largest manufacturing companies in the country, and Eduardo Rodriguez was worth billions. Victoria wasn't a poor janitor struggling to make ends meet, she was one of the wealthiest women in America. You're Eduardo Rodriguez's daughter, Jonathan said slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Yes, Victoria confirmed, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Jonathan. I never meant for it to go this far. Jonathan stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Victoria could see him processing the information, trying to understand the implications of what she'd just revealed. Why? He asked finally. Why would you lie about something like this? Victoria took a shaky breath. Because I wanted to know what it was like to be normal. To work for a living, to struggle, to understand how most people live. I never intended to fall in love with anyone. Jonathan's laugh was bitter and harsh. So this was all an experiment to you? A way to see how the other half lives? No, Victoria said desperately. It started that way, but it became something else. My feelings for you are real, Jonathan. Everything between us is real. Is it? Jonathan asked, his voice filled with hurt and anger. Because I don't even know who you are anymore. The woman I fell in love with was grateful for my attention, grateful for the opportunities one gave her. But you don't need my opportunities, do you? You have more money than I do. Victoria felt her heart breaking. The money doesn't matter. It never mattered. I fell in love with you, not with what you could give me. But you let me give you things anyway, Jonathan said, his voice cold. You let me play the generous benefactor while you were laughing at me behind my back. I never laughed at you, Victoria protested. I love you, Jonathan. That's the only thing that matters. Jonathan stood up abruptly, turning to face the window. How can I believe anything you say? You've been lying to me from the moment we met. Victoria felt desperate. She could see their relationship slipping away, and she didn't know how to stop it. I know I should have told you the truth sooner, but I was afraid. I was afraid you'd react exactly like this. Like what? Jonathan asked, turning back to face her. Like someone who's been betrayed by the person he trusted most? Victoria had no answer for that. She had betrayed his trust and she knew it. The question now was whether their love was strong enough to survive the truth. I'm sorry, Victoria whispered. I'm so sorry, Jonathan. I never meant to hurt you. Jonathan stared at her for a long moment, his expression filled with pain and disappointment. I need time to think, he said finally. I need time to process this. Victoria felt her heart sink. What does that mean for us? I don't know, Jonathan admitted. I honestly don't know if there can be an us after this. Victoria felt her world collapsing around her. She'd finally found love, real love, and she was losing it because of her own deception. Please don't give up on us, she begged. Please give me a chance to make this right. Jonathan looked at her with eyes full of hurt. I don't know if you can make this right, Victoria. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. As Victoria left his office that night, she felt like her heart had been torn from her chest. She'd lost the man she loved, and it was entirely her own fault. The question now was whether she could find a way to win him back, or whether their love story was over before it had really begun. The next 3 days were the longest of Victoria's life. She went through the motions of her daily routine, working her shifts, eating meals she couldn't taste, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, but her mind was consumed with thoughts of Jonathan and the devastation in his eyes when he'd learned the truth. Victoria had tried calling him, but he didn't answer. She'd sent text messages that went unread. She'd even gone to his office during regular business hours, but his assistant had turned her away with a polite but firm message that Mr. Sterling was not available. On Thursday morning, Victoria made a decision that terrified her. She was going to tell Jonathan everything, not just about her identity, but about why she'd hidden it, about her real motivations for taking the job at Sterling Industries, about the person she'd become while working there. Victoria spent the entire day preparing for the conversation. She wrote down everything she wanted to say, practicing the words until she felt ready to bare her soul completely. She knew this might be her last chance to save their relationship, and she was determined to be completely honest, no matter how painful it might be. That evening Victoria arrived at Sterling Industries with a heavy heart. She'd given her 2 weeks' notice at her other job, knowing that regardless of what happened with Jonathan, she couldn't continue living a double life. It was time to face the truth, all of it. Jonathan's office light was on, and Victoria could see him sitting at his desk, staring at the city lights beyond his window. He looked tired, defeated, and Victoria's heart ached at the sight of him. She knocked softly on his door frame. "Jonathan," she said quietly, "may I come in?" He turned to look at her, and Victoria could see the pain in his eyes. "I thought you might come," he said, his voice weary. "I've been sitting here trying to figure out what to say to you." "I have things to say to you too," Victoria said, stepping into his office. "Important things. Things I should have told you from the beginning." Jonathan gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Then sit down and let's hear it all." Victoria took a deep breath and began. "My name is Victoria Rodriguez and I'm the daughter of Eduardo Rodriguez. But what the background check probably didn't tell you is why I was working here as a janitor." Jonathan's eyes sharpened with interest. "I'm listening." "I graduated from Harvard Business School 2 years ago," Victoria continued. "My father wanted me to join the family business immediately, to take over eventually. But I felt like I didn't understand the world outside of wealth and privilege. I didn't know how most people lived, how they struggled, what it meant to work for survival rather than fulfillment." "So you decided to become a janitor," Jonathan said, his tone neutral. "I decided to disappear," Victoria corrected. "I created a new identity, took jobs that would teach me about real life, about real people. I wanted to understand what it meant to be grateful for work, to worry about paying rent, to live without the safety net of family money." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, processing her words. "And what did you learn?" "I learned that I'd been living in a bubble," Victoria said honestly. "I learned that most people work incredibly hard for very little, that dignity and kindness aren't dependent on wealth, that struggle can teach you things about yourself that comfort never could." "And you learned all this while lying to everyone around you," Jonathan pointed out. "Yes," Victoria admitted. "I lied to everyone, including myself. I told myself it was about education, about understanding, but part of it was also about proving that I could survive on my own, that I was more than just my father's daughter." Jonathan leaned back in his chair. "So when I offered you money to accompany me to events, you were laughing at me." "Never," Victoria said firmly. "I was never laughing at you. The money you offered was significant to Victoria Harrison, the woman I was pretending to be. And more importantly, your attention, your kindness, your interest in me as a person, those things were real and meaningful regardless of my financial situation. But you let me think I was rescuing you," Jonathan said, his voice filled with hurt. "You let me believe I was changing your life." Victoria felt tears gathering in her eyes. "You were changing my life, just not in the way you thought. You showed me what it meant to be valued for who I am rather than what I have. You made me feel beautiful and intelligent and worthy of love. Those things had nothing to do with money." "How can I believe that?" Jonathan asked. "How can I trust anything you say now?" Victoria had anticipated this question, and she had an answer ready. "Because I'm going to prove it to you. I'm going to tell you something that will make you understand exactly how I feel about you." Jonathan waited, his expression guarded. "I was planning to tell you the truth anyway," Victoria said. "Tonight, before you discovered it yourself. I'd already made the decision to end the deception because I realized that what we have is too important to build on lies." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I wrote this letter 3 days ago, before your background check was complete. I was going to give it to you tonight." Jonathan took the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. Inside was a handwritten letter, dated 3 days earlier, in which Victoria had detailed her real identity and her reasons for hiding it. She'd written about her love for him, her fear of losing him, and her decision to trust him with the truth. "I was scared," Victoria continued as Jonathan read. "I was scared that you'd think I was playing games with you, that you'd believe I was mocking you or using you for entertainment. But I realized that living a lie was worse than risking your rejection." Jonathan finished reading the letter and looked up at her. "This is dated 3 days ago." "Yes," Victoria confirmed. "I wrote it the night after our dinner at Romano's when you asked me about my family. I realized I couldn't keep lying to you, not when I loved you so much." "You were going to tell me voluntarily," Jonathan said slowly. "Yes," Victoria said. "Because I figured out that I'd rather have you hate me for telling the truth than love me for living a lie." Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, and Victoria could see him struggling with conflicting emotions. "Why should I believe you weren't just covering your bases? Planning to tell me before I found out on my own?" Victoria had one more thing to show him. She pulled out her phone and showed him a text conversation with her best friend from 3 days earlier, where she discussed her plans to tell Jonathan the truth. She showed him a consultation appointment she'd scheduled with a lawyer about changing her legal name back to Rodriguez. She showed him evidence of her internal struggle and her decision to end the deception. "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately," Victoria said. "But I need you to understand that my feelings for you are real. I fell in love with you, Jonathan Sterling, not with your money or your power or your position. I fell in love with the man who dances with me in his Kid Harrison, who remembers that I like extra foam in my coffee, who holds me when I have nightmares." Jonathan's expression softened slightly. "Victoria. I know I hurt you," Victoria continued. "I know I broke your trust and I know that might be unforgivable. But I'm asking you to consider the possibility that people can make mistakes and still love each other. I'm asking you to remember what we have together, what we've built, what we could have if you can find a way to trust me again." Jonathan stood up and walked to his window, staring out at the city lights. Victoria watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs, knowing that her entire future depended on his next words. "I've been thinking about us for 3 days," Jonathan said finally. "Thinking about every conversation we've had, every moment we've shared, trying to figure out what was real and what was performance." Victoria felt her heart sink. "And what did you conclude?" "That you're right," Jonathan said, turning to face her. "Your feelings for me were real. I could see it in your eyes, feel it in the way you touched me, hear it in your voice when you said you loved me. Whatever else you lied about, you didn't lie about that." Victoria felt a flicker of hope. "You believe me?" "I believe that you love me," Jonathan said carefully. "But I also believe that you're capable of deception on a scale that terrifies me. How do I know you won't lie to me again? How do I know this isn't all an elaborate game that I'm too blind to see?" Victoria stood up and walked toward him, stopping just out of reach. "Because I'm going to give you something that will prove my sincerity beyond any doubt." "What?" Jonathan asked. "Complete transparency," Victoria said. "I'm going to tell you everything about my life, my family, my past. I'm going to introduce you to my parents, my friends, my world. I'm going to let you investigate every aspect of my background if that's what it takes to earn your trust back." Jonathan stared at her. "You'd do that?" "I'd do anything to prove to you that what we have is real," Victoria said. "I'd give up my privacy, my secrets, my comfortable anonymity. I'd expose myself completely if it meant saving what we have together." Jonathan's expression was unreadable. "And if I said I needed time? If I said I wasn't ready to make any decisions about us?" "Then I'd wait," Victoria said without hesitation. "I'd wait as long as it took because you're worth waiting for." Jonathan studied her face and Victoria could see him weighing her words, trying to decide whether to trust her again. "There's something else," he said finally. "Something I discovered that you need to know about." Victoria felt a chill of fear. "What?" "The night I had you investigated, I also had myself investigated," Jonathan said. "I wanted to understand what you might have learned about me, what might have influenced your decision to get involved with me." Victoria's heart began to race. "What did you find?" "I found out that your father and I have been business rivals for years," Jonathan said. "Rodriguez Industries and Sterling Industries have been competing for the same contracts, the same markets, the same opportunities. We've never met personally, but we've been adversaries in the business world." Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I believe you," Jonathan said. "But it adds another layer of complexity to our situation. Not only were you lying about your identity, but you were potentially in a position to spy on me, to gather information that could benefit your father's company." "I would never do that," Victoria said desperately. "I would never use our relationship to hurt you professionally." "I know," Jonathan said. "But others might not see it that way. If our relationship becomes public, people will assume that's exactly what happened." Victoria felt overwhelmed by the implications. "So what does this mean for us?" "It means that if we want to be together, we're going to face challenges that go beyond just rebuilding trust," Jonathan said. "We're going to have to deal with public scrutiny, family disapproval, and business complications that could affect both our companies." Victoria felt tears streaming down her face. "Is it worth it to you? Am I worth all of that?" Jonathan stepped closer to her, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek. "That's what I've been trying to figure out for 3 days," he said softly. "And I think I finally have my answer." Victoria held her breath, waiting for his decision. "Yes," Jonathan said. "You're worth it. What we have is worth fighting for." Victoria felt her heart soar. "Really?" Really? Jonathan confirmed. But there are conditions. Anything, Victoria said immediately. Complete honesty from now on, Jonathan said. No more secrets, no more lies, no more half-truths. If we're going to make this work, it has to be built on absolute transparency. Yes, Victoria agreed. Absolutely. And we do this right, Jonathan continued. I want to meet your parents, I want to understand your world, I want to integrate our lives properly. No more living in separate worlds. Victoria nodded eagerly. I want that too. Jonathan pulled her into his arms, and Victoria felt like she could finally breathe again. I love you, Victoria Rodriguez, he said. And I'm willing to fight for us, but I need you to promise me that the lies stop here. I promise, Victoria said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. No more lies, no more secrets. Just us being honest with each other. Jonathan kissed her then, and Victoria felt like she was coming home. The truth was out, the deception was over, and somehow, miraculously, they were still together. But as they held each other in the quiet of his office, Victoria knew that their real challenges were just beginning. They would have to navigate the complex world of family expectations, business rivalries, and public scrutiny. But for the first time in months, Victoria felt like they had a real chance at happiness. The foundation of lies had been destroyed, but in its place they were building something stronger. A relationship based on truth, trust, and the kind of love that could survive anything. The next morning, Victoria woke up in Jonathan's arms feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The weight of deception had been lifted from her shoulders, and despite the challenges that lay ahead, she felt hopeful about their future for the first time since Jonathan had discovered her real identity. Good morning, Jonathan murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. How are you feeling? Scared, Victoria admitted, but also relieved. I'm tired of living a lie. Jonathan tightened his arms around her. We'll figure this out together, he promised. Starting with your parents. I think it's time I met them. Victoria felt a flutter of nervousness. Are you sure you're ready for that? My father can be intense. I'm sure, Jonathan said firmly. If we're going to build a life together, I need to understand where you come from. Victoria nodded, knowing he was right. I'll call them today and set something up. Later that morning, Victoria made the call she'd been dreading. Her father answered on the second ring, his voice warm with affection. Victoria. How are you, Mija? Your mother and I have been worried. It's been weeks since we've heard from you. I'm fine, Papa, Victoria said, using the childhood nickname that always made her feel safe. Actually, I'm calling because I need to talk to you and Mama about something important. Of course. What is it? Victoria took a deep breath. I've been living under a different name for the past year. I've been working regular jobs trying to understand life outside of our world. And I've fallen in love with someone I met while doing that. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Victoria, what are you talking about? I'm talking about Jonathan Sterling, Victoria said. I'm in love with him and I want to bring him to meet you and Mama. Another pause, longer this time. Jonathan Sterling of Sterling Industries? Yes, Victoria confirmed. The man who's been competing with our company for years? Yes, Victoria said again, her voice smaller now. Victoria Rodriguez, her father said, his voice taking on the tone she remembered from childhood when she was in serious trouble. You need to come home right now. We need to talk about this face to face. I'll be there this afternoon, Victoria promised. And Papa? I'm bringing him with me. Fine, Eduardo said curtly. But I hope you know what you're doing, Mija. After hanging up, Victoria turned to Jonathan, who had been listening to her side of the conversation. That went better than I expected, she said weakly. Really? Jonathan asked, raising an eyebrow. Because it sounded like your father was not pleased. He's protective, Victoria explained. And the business rivalry between your companies doesn't help. But he'll come around once he meets you. Jonathan looked skeptical, but he nodded. When do we leave? This afternoon, Victoria said. Are you sure you're ready for this? I'm sure, Jonathan said, pulling her close. I love you, Victoria. I'm not going to let anything or anyone keep us apart. The drive to the Rodriguez estate took 2 hours, and Victoria spent most of it preparing Jonathan for what he was about to experience. Her family's wealth was old money, inherited through generations, and their lifestyle reflected that heritage. The house is big, Victoria warned as they pulled through the gates of the estate. But don't let it intimidate you. My parents are good people, even if they can seem overwhelming at first. The house was indeed massive, a Spanish colonial mansion surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens. Jonathan whistled low as they approached the front door. You grew up here? He asked. Yes, Victoria said. It's beautiful, but it can also feel like a prison sometimes. That's part of why I left. Victoria's mother, Elena Rodriguez, met them at the door. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, with Victoria's same dark eyes and warm smile. Despite the tension of the situation, she embraced her daughter warmly. Victoria, my beautiful girl, Elena said, switching between English and Spanish as she always did when emotional. We've missed you so much. I've missed you too, Mama, Victoria said, hugging her mother tightly. This is Jonathan. Elena turned to Jonathan, and Victoria could see her mother's appraising gaze taking in every detail of his appearance. Mr. Sterling, she said politely. Welcome to our home. Thank you for having me, Mrs. Rodriguez, Jonathan replied, his voice respectful but confident. Victoria has told me so much about you. And she's told us very little about you, Elena said, though her tone was more curious than hostile. Come, your father is waiting in his study. Victoria felt Jonathan's hand squeeze hers as they walked through the house. She could see him taking in the artwork, the antique furniture, the obvious wealth that surrounded them. This was her real world, and she knew it was very different from the woman he'd fallen in love with. Eduardo Rodriguez was waiting in his study, a room lined with books and dominated by a massive mahogany desk. He was a distinguished man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded respect in any room. Victoria, he said, standing up to embrace his daughter. You look well. Thank you, Papa, Victoria said. I'd like you to meet Jonathan Sterling. Eduardo turned to Jonathan, and Victoria could see the two men sizing each other up. They were both powerful, successful, and accustomed to being in control. The tension in the room was palpable. Mr. Sterling, Eduardo said, extending his hand. I've heard a lot about you. All business-related, of course. Mr. Rodriguez, Jonathan replied, shaking Eduardo's hand firmly. I've heard a lot about you as well. Your reputation in the industry is impressive. Thank you, Eduardo said. Please sit down. We have much to discuss. As they settled into the leather chairs, Victoria felt like she was watching a chess match between two grandmasters. Each man was polite, respectful, but clearly evaluating the other. So, Eduardo began, my daughter tells me that you two have been involved for some time now. Yes, sir, Jonathan confirmed. I'm in love with your daughter, and I believe she feels the same way about me. I do, Victoria said firmly. I love him, Papa. Eduardo studied Jonathan for a long moment. And you know about Victoria's experiment with working under a different identity? I do now, Jonathan said. I won't lie to you, Mr. Rodriguez. I was hurt and confused when I discovered the truth. But I've come to understand Victoria's motivations and I respect them. Do you? Eduardo asked. Because I'm not sure I do. My daughter risked her safety, her reputation, and apparently her heart, all for some misguided notion of understanding the common people. Papa, Victoria protested. It wasn't misguided. I learned things about myself and about life that I never could have learned otherwise. Including how to deceive people who care about you? Eduardo asked pointedly. Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt people. But I also know that everything I experienced was real, including my love for Jonathan. Eduardo's expression softened slightly at the sight of his daughter's tears. Mija, I just want to understand. Why him? Why this man who we've been competing with for years? Because I didn't know about the business rivalry when I met him, Victoria said. I fell in love with him as a person, not as a competitor or a business opportunity. I fell in love with his kindness, his intelligence, his strength. And what about you, Mr. Sterling? Eduardo asked. What do you love about my daughter? Jonathan looked at Victoria, and she could see the sincerity in his eyes. I love her courage, he said. I love that she was willing to step outside her comfort zone to grow as a person. I love her compassion, her intelligence, her determination to be more than just her circumstances. Even though she lied to you? Eduardo pressed. Even though she lied to me, Jonathan confirmed. Because I understand why she did it and I believe that people can learn from their mistakes. Eduardo was quiet for a long moment, considering Jonathan's words. And what are your intentions toward my daughter? I want to marry her, Jonathan said without hesitation. I want to build a life with her, to support her dreams, to be the kind of partner she deserves. Victoria felt her heart stop. Jonathan had never mentioned marriage before, and hearing him declare his intentions so boldly to her father made her realize just how serious he was about their relationship. "Marriage?" Eduardo repeated. "That's a big step, especially given the complications of our business relationship." "I'm aware of the complications," Jonathan said. "But I believe they can be managed. Victoria and I have already discussed complete transparency and honesty moving forward. We're committed to making this work." Eduardo looked at his daughter. "And you, Victoria? Is this what you want?" "Yes, Papa," Victoria said, her voice strong and clear. "This is what I want. I want to marry Jonathan and build a life with him." Eduardo nodded slowly. "Then I suppose we need to discuss how to merge our families without destroying our businesses." Over the next few hours, the conversation evolved from interrogation to negotiation. Eduardo and Jonathan discussed the challenges of their business rivalry, while Elena and Victoria talked about wedding plans and family traditions. By the time dinner was served, the atmosphere had become considerably warmer. "I have to admit," Eduardo said over dessert, "I'm impressed by your character, Jonathan. You could have walked away when you discovered Victoria's deception, but you chose to fight for your relationship instead." "Victoria is worth fighting for," Jonathan replied. "She's the best thing that's ever happened to me." "And you, Mija," Elena said to Victoria, "I can see that you're truly happy. Happier than I've seen you in years." Victoria smiled, feeling tears of joy gathering in her eyes. "I'm happy, Mama. I'm finally exactly where I'm supposed to be." As they prepared to leave that evening, Eduardo pulled Jonathan aside for a private conversation. "Take care of her," Eduardo said simply. "She's been through a lot this past year, and she needs someone who will support her and protect her." "I will," Jonathan promised. "I love her more than my own life." "Good," Eduardo said. "Because if you hurt her, you'll have to answer to me." Jonathan smiled. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As they drove home, Victoria felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her parents approved of Jonathan and more importantly, they could see how happy she was with him. "That went well," Jonathan said, taking her hand. "Your parents are wonderful people." "They like you," Victoria said, squeezing his hand. "I could tell." "And I like them," Jonathan replied. "I can see where you get your strength and your values." Victoria smiled, feeling more hopeful about their future than she had in weeks. The truth was out, their families were supportive, and they were finally free to build their relationship on a foundation of honesty and trust. "So," Victoria said playfully, "did you mean what you said about wanting to marry me?" Jonathan lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Every word," he said. "I can't wait to make you my wife." Victoria felt her heart soar. After all the lies and deception, after all the pain and uncertainty, they had finally found their way to the truth. And the truth was that they loved each other enough to overcome any obstacle. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Victoria knew that with Jonathan by her side, she could face anything. They had built something beautiful together, and now they were ready to build something even better. A life based on love, trust, and the kind of honesty that could weather any storm. 3 months after Victoria's parents had given their blessing, Jonathan planned the proposal of a lifetime. He'd been working secretly with Eduardo and Elena to create a moment that would perfectly capture the journey they'd taken together. Victoria thought they were going to Sterling Industries for a late dinner in Jonathan's office, something that had become a tradition for them on the anniversary of their first meeting. But when the elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, Victoria gasped in surprise. The entire executive floor had been transformed into a romantic wonderland. Thousands of white roses filled the hallway, soft music played from hidden speakers, and candles cast a warm glow throughout the space. But most surprisingly, Victoria's parents were there, along with Jonathan's mother and several of their closest friends. "What is this?" Victoria asked, her voice filled with wonder. "This is where our story began," Jonathan said, taking her hand. "This is where I first saw you, where I first fell in love with you, and where I want to ask you the most important question of my life." Victoria felt tears gathering in her eyes as Jonathan led her to the spot where she dropped her cleaning supplies that first night. Someone had placed a beautiful arrangement of white roses there, and Victoria realized that even the most painful beginning of their story had become something beautiful. "Victoria Rodriguez," Jonathan said, dropping to one knee and pulling out a ring box. "You changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You taught me what it means to love someone completely, to trust someone with my heart, and to build something real and lasting together." Victoria's hands flew to her mouth as she stared down at the man she loved with all her heart. "I know our beginning was complicated," Jonathan continued, his voice filled with emotion. We both made mistakes, we both learned difficult lessons, but we also discovered something precious. A love that's strong enough to survive anything. Victoria was crying now, tears of joy streaming down her face. I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice when you chose to trust me with your heart, Jonathan said. I want to be your partner, your best friend, your safe harbor in any storm. Will you marry me? Yes, Victoria said without hesitation. Yes, yes, yes. Jonathan slipped the ring onto her finger and stood up to kiss her, and the small group of family and friends erupted in cheers and applause. The ring was stunning, a classic solitaire that caught the candlelight beautifully, but Victoria barely noticed it. She was too busy kissing the man she loved, the man who had just promised to spend his life with her. I love you, Jonathan whispered against her lips. I love you so much. I love you too, Victoria replied, her voice thick with tears. I can't believe this is real. It's real, Jonathan assured her. We're real. And we're going to be happy together. The celebration continued for hours, with toasts and laughter and stories about the couple's unusual courtship. Eduardo and Jonathan had clearly bonded over their shared love of Victoria, and Elena was already discussing wedding plans with Jonathan's mother. I have a confession, Victoria said later that evening as she and Jonathan stood alone on his office balcony, looking out over the city lights. I used to stand here during my cleaning shifts and dream about what it would be like to be part of this world. And now? Jonathan asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Now I realize that the world I was dreaming about was never about money or status or power, Victoria said, leaning back against his chest. It was about finding someone who loved me for who I really am. It was about finding you. Jonathan pressed a kiss to her temple. You know what I realized? What? That night when you dropped the cleaning supplies, you weren't just cleaning my office, Jonathan said. You were cleaning out my heart, making room for love I didn't even know I was capable of feeling. Victoria laughed, turning in his arms to face him. That's very poetic for a CEO. You bring out the poet in me, Jonathan said, kissing her softly. Among other things. What other things? Victoria asked playfully. The protector, the dreamer, the man who believes in happy endings, Jonathan said. You've made me a better version of myself, Victoria. You've made me whole. Victoria felt her heart overflow with love. You've done the same for me. I was lost before I met you, trying to find myself in other people's lives. But you helped me understand that who I am isn't about what I do or where I come from. It's about how I love and how I let myself be loved. And how do you let yourself be loved? Jonathan asked. Completely, Victoria said. Without reservation, without fear, without walls. I let myself be loved by giving you all of me, the good, the bad, the complicated, the simple. All of it. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. That's all I've ever wanted. Just you, exactly as you are. They held each other in the quiet of the night, two people who had found their way to love through deception and discovery, through pain and healing, through the courage to be vulnerable with each other. 6 months later, Victoria and Jonathan were married in a beautiful ceremony at the Rodriguez estate. Victoria wore her grandmother's wedding dress, which had been altered to fit her perfectly, and Jonathan wore a tuxedo that had been custom-made for the occasion. The wedding was elegant but intimate, with only close family and friends in attendance. Eduardo walked Victoria down the aisle, tears streaming down his face as he prepared to give his daughter to the man who had proven himself worthy of her love. Take care of her, Eduardo whispered to Jonathan as he placed Victoria's hand in his. With my life, Jonathan promised. The ceremony was beautiful, with vows that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Victoria and Jonathan promised to love each other honestly, to support each other's dreams, and to build a life together based on trust and mutual respect. You may kiss the bride, the minister said, and Jonathan didn't need to be told twice. He pulled Victoria into his arms and kissed her with all the love in his heart, while their family and friends cheered and applauded. At the reception, Eduardo made a toast that captured the essence of their unusual love story. To Victoria and Jonathan, he said, raising his glass, who proved that love can overcome any obstacle, survive any deception, and transform any heart. You've shown us that the best love stories aren't about perfect beginnings, but about the courage to choose love even when it's difficult. Jonathan and Victoria danced their first dance to At Last, and as they swayed together in the soft light of the ballroom, Victoria felt like she was living in a dream. Any regrets? Jonathan asked softly. Only one, Victoria said, smiling up at him. What's that? That I waited so long to tell you the truth, Victoria said. We could have had this happiness sooner if I'd been braver. Everything happened exactly when it was supposed to, Jonathan said. We needed to go through what we went through to appreciate what we have now. Do you really believe that? Victoria asked. I believe that our love is strong enough to survive anything, Jonathan said. And I believe that we're going to be happy together for the rest of our lives. Victoria felt tears of joy gather in her eyes. I believe that too. As the night continued, Victoria found herself thinking about how far they'd come from that first night when she dropped her cleaning supplies in his hallway. They'd both been different people then. She'd been hiding from her true self, and he'd been protecting his heart from vulnerability. But love had transformed them both. Victoria had learned to be honest about who she was, and Jonathan had learned to trust someone with his heart. Together they'd built something beautiful and lasting. What are you thinking about? Jonathan asked as they sat together during a quiet moment. Us, Victoria said. How we got here, how much we've both changed, how grateful I am that you gave us a chance even after you learned the truth. You know what I'm grateful for? Jonathan asked. What? That you had the courage to take that job, to step outside your comfort zone, to risk everything for the chance to grow as a person, Jonathan said. If you hadn't done that, we never would have met. Victoria smiled. So you're grateful for my deception? I'm grateful for your bravery, Jonathan corrected. The deception was just the wrapper around the gift of who you really are. Victoria laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. I love you, Jonathan Sterling. I love you too, Victoria Sterling, Jonathan said, trying out her new name. Mrs. Sterling, Victoria said, testing the sound of it. I like it. Good, Jonathan said, kissing her softly. Because you're stuck with it for the rest of your life. As the reception wound down, Victoria and Jonathan prepared to leave for their honeymoon in Italy. As they said goodbye to their families, Victoria felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey that had brought them together. Thank you, she whispered to her parents. For understanding, for supporting us, for raising me to be brave enough to take risks. We're proud of you, Mija, Eduardo said, hugging her tightly. You've found your happiness, and that's all we ever wanted for you. And thank you, Victoria said to Jonathan's mother, for welcoming me into your family. Thank you for making my son happy, Jonathan's mother replied. I haven't seen him smile this much in years. As they drove away from the reception, Victoria felt like she was beginning the greatest adventure of her life. She and Jonathan had overcome every obstacle in their path, and now they were free to build the life they dreamed of together. So, Mrs. Sterling, Jonathan said, taking her hand, are you ready for our happily ever after? Victoria squeezed his hand and smiled. I've been ready since the moment I dropped those cleaning supplies in your hallway. Jonathan laughed. Best accident of my life. Mine too, Victoria agreed. Mine too. As they drove into the night, heading toward their future together, Victoria reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. They'd started as strangers from different worlds, brought together by chance and circumstance. They'd navigated deception and discovery, pain and healing, doubt and faith. But most importantly, they'd chosen love. They'd chosen to trust each other, to be vulnerable with each other, to build something real and lasting together. And in doing so they'd create